I wanted to start by introducing myself a little bit. I'm Kandace Boos. I live with my husband, Mike, in downtown Kitchener. We have two children, Caleb, who's 4, and Junia, who is 18 months. I've been working at MCC since September, so I'm still pretty new, so go easy on me. I will talk a little bit later about my experience with the Pilgrimage for Indigenous Rights last spring, which is how Indigenous rights sort of came onto my radar and has developed into quite a passion for me, and how I ended up working at MCC. But I firstly wanted to talk a little bit about the two-row wampum belt. So this is one that has been given by Mennonite Church Canada to Sterling Mennonite, which is our home congregation in Kitchener. And it was commissioned and made by someone in Six Nations. I don't know the name of the artist, but I'll leave this out so that you can feel it. It's very heavy. It's very thick beads. It's a traditional process, and it's it's all handmade, and this is sort of the traditional Indigenous way of documenting treaties and agreements and covenants that they enter into. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the two-row wampum because whether we know it or not, we have entered into this treaty, into this covenant. So the two-row wampum started in 1613 between some Dutch settlers and the Haudenosaunee, whose territory we're currently gathered on. So 2013 was the 400-year anniversary of the two-row wampum. The two rows, one row symbolizes the Dutch or the European settlers and their tall ships, and the other row symbolizes the Haudenosaunee and their canoes. And they're traveling side by side, parallel, never touching, through a river. The white symbolizes peace and friendship. And this is the idea that we are promising to not interfere with each other, but to travel as brothers side by side. And the tails on the ends of it represent, as long as the rivers flow, the sun shines, and the grass grows, we will be part of this covenant. So this is a promise that the Dutch made on behalf of the church. So this is part of our history, and I think for me this has been a very powerful symbol to realize that the story of first people in Canada, the story of colonization and of settling Canada, is not just a story of my ancestors or of some other people groups. It's truly part of our story, and it's our responsibility as well. So I will leave this at the front at the end so you can take a look and feel just quite how heavy it is. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the Pilgrimage for Indigenous Rights before I get into all of our program stuff. For me, the Pilgrimage for Indigenous Rights was a very important personal journey, but it also had a huge ideological effect on me. And for those of you who don't know, it was organized by Mennonite Church Canada, and we walked from downtown Kitchener 600 kilometers to downtown Ottawa, and we took just over 3 weeks to do so. And my daughter, Junia, was only 10 months, and she came with me. So it was grueling, but it was a phenomenal experience, I think, for both of us. I have a bit of writing here, if you'll bear with me, a reflection poem sort of thing that I had written after I came back, that I would like to share with you. It talks a little bit about some of the symbolism we had learned and the significance. I do make reference to smudging, which is burning of sage and using the smoke as a cleansing and a healing, and the smoke carries prayers up to Creator. So I have found it to be a powerful spiritual experience for me as a Christian, and using that as a tool in a sort of tactile understanding of prayers being carried to Creator, which was very powerful. Okay, so bear with me, my writing here. The solidness of the earth echoed up my legs into the ache of my hips, resting in the small of my back where the carried weight of my baby sat. The rhythm echoes my heartbeat, echoes my breath, echoes the drum, always the drum. I can't see my feet for the bundled head and body of my daughter, tucked in safe and warm and sleeping on my chest. The rhythm of my heartbeat, our breaths, and the drum lulling her. The spirit of the group is palpable. We each walk on our own journey, but we walk in one heartbeat, one rhythm, one drum. Each of us carrying our own burdens, our own ancestors, and stories of our own pieces of soul and land. Each of us carries our own guilt and shame and trepidation about being a settler ally. Will we say the wrong thing? Will we cause more hurt? Can we, Canadian society, be forgiven? Will it require more sacrifice? I think that's the settler fear. Will we have to sacrifice what we have now to make things right? The answer, the wisdom, is in the circle. If we have the courage, the boldness, the heart to ask the question and stay to hear the answer. In the circle, we smudge, and then with open eyes and open hearts, we listen, we speak, we cry, we find our place, and we sing. Some of us bandage our feet, some rub aching backs and necks, others tend to lonely or broken hearts far from home, but we all prepare ourselves for more steps, more rhythm, more drum. As we traveled in the footsteps of the ancestors we carried with us and the ancestors we've never known, we walked in traditions of Jesus himself and the early church. We, as walkers, followed the rhythm of Christian pilgrimage as we searched to find that heartbeat, that breath, and that drum in our own tradition and our stolen lands. At the same time, somewhat unaware, we walked the paths of the traditional grandmothers, the water keepers and the nomadic peoples, the rightful owners of the very ground we rooted in. The pilgrims, truth seekers, allies, watched the land change around us. From urban to rural and back again, from fertile valley farmland to misty rock faces, draped in juniper and trees with shallow but stubborn roots. Still, we walked, we sang, we drummed, we shielded ourselves from the rain and snow and cold, braced ourselves for the passing of trucks and people too busy or too fast to feel the rhythm. We put one foot in front of the other until it was time to gather. Whether for food or for the nourishment of the circle, we walked toward the gathering, knowing full well that until that warm Sunday in April, we too were too busy to feel the rhythm, really. We each left behind lives and dear ones, knowing, or at least hoping, to be changed and grown and grounded in the history of walking. On the last day, we had the honor of following our elder and friend Henry as he drummed us into our final stop on our journey. Henry's gentle voice and powerful rhythm always woke Junia from even the deepest sleep, as seems to be the way between the old and young. Henry's drum, the heartbeat of our group, kept time for our breaths, our steps, our hearts. The deep, steady beat echoed around the inside of my ribcage and settled in the deep pit of my being, driving me on. Just as Junia's first experience of sound was the echo of my own heart beating in unison with hers, so the drum echoes the heart of the Creator. In the beginning, we were taught that the final verse in each of the traditional songs we had heard was played without the drum beat because it is the ancestors who have passed on before us, whose hearts no longer beat the way our own do. The ancestors, the cloud of witnesses, and similarly, our drum beat has stopped. We've each returned home to those lives and dear ones, weary and hopeful. But like the ancestors, we're still part of the song because, you see, we all walk and breathe to Creator's drum beat. And here's the thing. When the drum beat ends, the song doesn't stop. We continue singing in truth, in unity, and in hope. Our Indigenous brothers and sisters have the peace of their ancestors guiding them, continuing to participate in their lives on earth, just as we, in our faith, have hope of life everlasting. And though Henry and his drum are now home in Treaty 1, Winnipeg, the song we all sang together goes on, because the work isn't finished. Our brothers and sisters are still living without heat, clean water, basic education, or adequate health care. Racism is alive and well north of the 49th parallel. Families in our own True North Strong and Free are not free, and until they are, our song isn't finished. It'll give you a little bit of an idea of how emotional the experience was walking so far. Henry is Henry Neufeld from Winnipeg. He's 87 years old, and he walked the whole way and drummed most of the way. He's an incredible man, Mennonite man who speaks Ojibwe, and this has been his life passion. And it was a life-changing experience to get to meet Henry and spend 3 weeks with him. So out of the pilgrimage for Indigenous rights, I sort of started me on a journey of research and learning and spending a lot of time reading the Truth and Reconciliation and the calls to action. And eventually, when my position showed up at MCC, I applied and began working there in September. My role with MCC is mostly church education, and my coworkers are both in Timmins, and they do much of the on-the-ground work with Indigenous folks in the north. Most of them are on small reserves, and a lot of them do not have road access, so fly-in only or ice bridges in the winter. So I fly up there occasionally, they fly down here occasionally, but for the most part, I'm on my own down here. And most of my job entails visiting churches like yourselves and teaching about what we do, our programs, and what we've been working on, especially in the north. So I'm going to introduce you to some of the programs we're working on and some of the photos that we have of those programs. While that's warming up. Okay, so the Indigenous Neigbours program. So we have a number of programs that are ongoing, and some of the major ones include our Youth H2O, which is bringing water access. I'll go into this a little bit more, but water access in Pikaboo First Nation, which is very remote and has been under a boil advisory for 23 years. Sowing Reconciliation is our garden project in the north. Save the Evidence involves Six Nations Reserve near Brantford. Niska Artisans, I will talk a little bit more about that, but we sell moccasins and beading and several different traditional crafts at 50 Kent in Kitchener, and they're fair trade. And Dancing Toward Reconciliation are big events that we, big educational events that sort of is my bread and butter. So most of our work is done in Treaty 9 territory, the Aski First Nation, and there are quite a few different communities in the north. You can see, I'll show you, Timmins is actually really in the middle of the province. We like to think of it as being very northern, but Timmins is right about here. So the majority of the population of Ontario is far south of that, and all of these little dots represent communities that are fairly remote. Some of them have roads, many of them do not. Many of them are fly-in only. So our Clean Water project is in Pikaboo First Nation, which is just on the border, almost to the border of Manitoba. It's very remote. It's a fly-in only. There's only about 2,000 people, and it's been known, unfortunately, for the last 25 years as the suicide capital of the world. So they have a serious crisis of youth suicide issues and mental health issues in general. They Currently, their water is in large cisterns for the community, and if you have lack of access to a vehicle, or you've physical barriers to getting to a cistern and climbing a cistern and filling up your buckets, then you have very limited access to the water. Many families are between 100 and 150 kilometers from the water. So every time you need to fill up a bucket, you have to drive 150 kilometers. It's quite physically taxing and very expensive. When you have a community with no roads, having a vehicle is very expensive. And gas and all of those things, it becomes a real burden. The UN has declared that basic potable water is a basic human right. So one of our projects, we're currently working with Waters Without Borders to put potable water access in some key places for youth. So specifically the Youth Community Center, the baseball diamond, and the hockey rink, so that youth have access to water there after sports, and also this idea of investing in our youth, so that to try and sort of raise morale that way. We do a lot of work with Pikaboo actually, and have a good relationship with their tribal council there. So this is one of the projects we're working on with them. Okay, so this is it's sort of a map of water access in Ontario. A lot of people don't realize that Ontario is one of the few provinces in the country that has a serious water access crisis. The red points are have do not consume orders, and the orange are boil advisory. Some of these places have been under boil advisory for over 2 decades. So there's many diseases and things associated with drinking water that's not been boiled. Part of this I get a lot of questions about how did this happen. Part of it is pollution, large companies polluting into the water, especially mining companies, because mining is very big in Northern Ontario. So a lot of pollution and contaminants. We have some issues with mercury poisoning in the water, and as well as they're far enough north, they have permafrost, and putting pipes into the ground is not a practical solution at this point, and also extremely cost-effective, not cost-effective, and the government has just not followed through on promises of access to sustainable water solutions. Sewing Reconciliation is our garden kits project, and so this past year we've done some individual garden kits for families, and this year we'll be doing larger community garden plots. So food is extremely expensive in the north, and the idea between gardens is to be able to grow some of your own food and have some food sovereignty and be able to choose fresh foods without it costing an arm and a leg. Sometimes things like a bunch of 7 or 8 bananas can cost upwards of $16, and 1 pint of strawberries I've seen for as much as $24. So fresh fruit and fresh vegetables is extremely, extremely expensive, and it's a real problem in the north. Save the Evidence campaign is a new thing that we're just starting into, and it involves maintaining and restoring the Woodland Cultural Center, which is the residential school on Mohawk territory. This is we want to maintain it to make it into an educational site to teach about the history of the residential schools there. next summer, we will be having 4-week-long youth trips with MDS to restore some of the outbuildings, like the chicken coop and some shed-type things, and rebuild some desks and stuff. And there'll be an education component to that as well. You'll learn about some of the people that attended the school, some of the people that taught at the school. There's a lot of information, a lot of history that's part of that. And it's just, probably 2 hours away for you guys, but yeah. Our Niska Artisans program is something I'm very passionate about because I myself am an artist, and which is what I've done professionally before I had children. So the Niska Artisan program, we have about 35 artisans in the north. Many of them are from Attawapiskat, which is on the James Bay coast area, also flying communities. And they use traditional methods to make moccasins and mittens and jewelry and all kinds of beautiful wares, sculptures. You can see some of them there. And we buy them at a fair price, the price the artisans set themselves, and we sell them without a markup, so they are fair trade. And we sell them at 50 Kent in Kitchener, so not too far away. They make wonderful Christmas presents, and this past Christmas we ran a Christmas Niska Noel program, and we sold almost $4,000 of worth of moccasins. We completely sold out of moccasins, and as it turns out, there's been a hide shortage in the north currently, and so we haven't been able to restock. So they are back ordered, but we will be getting some more. Unless you are like a size 14 to 16 men's, we've got one pair for you.
Craig's name on it.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're wonderful. They last for years. We have people that come in that are replacing them after 20 years, and they're just they're fantastic. I have a little story about my pair of moccasins that I bought when I was in Timmins. I was at an artisan festival, and I bought a pair of moose hide moccasins. I had my eye on this pair, and I loved them, and then they sold before I was able to get them. And so I talked to the artisan and was like, oh, I really wanted these ones, and they're gone. Do you have any more like that? And she asked me what size I was, and I was thinking she would just go home and take a look. And that was 9 o'clock at night. She came back 9 o'clock the next morning. She had made me a pair overnight, and they're just gorgeous. The beading is incredible. Her name is Lucy. She's from Attawapiskat, and she does a traditional 2-needle method with beading, which is just like, it's insane to watch. It's just so busy, so crazy, and it's so durable. I've never lost a bead, and I have lots of reason to lose beads with children. So, but they're fantastic, and they're so well made. And each pair has a story. And I do a lot of the selling at 50 Kent, and so I can tell you the name of the person who made your pair of moccasins if you come in and buy them. So. Yeah, there's always a great story behind each piece that we have, because each one is original. So this is our material resources program in the north, which we don't do a whole lot of material resources. We've done some crisis things like the soup when there was a food shortage, or the H1N1 response kits, which had things like tissues and hand sanitizer that it was just really hard to get in the north. And we have, on the right side, we have our sort of blessings cupboard at the Timmins office, and it's a lot of the MCC quilts and knitted baby clothes, that sort of thing. We often have people come into the office that are homeless or are housing and unstable, and they need warm blankets for the cold, and many of them are women that are expecting, and so we have sort of some baby things that we can give them, which is really great. The Mennonite quilts have a long history with the north, and it's always a very appreciated gift and often a traditional gift given to elders. So when we've done any work with elders that have taught us or helped us, we try to give them each a quilt. And after the Truth and Reconciliation came to Northern Ontario and heard some stories, specifically from the Mennonite residential schools in the north, they asked for MCC to provide some quilts for a healing camp for the elders, and that was very well appreciated and often helps build relationship when we can provide things like that. Dancing toward reconciliation is usually my jam, and we host large events with speakers or documentary screenings, and it's a lot of educational stuff and question and answer things as well. On the right, you can see the Oakville one. We had 300 people who came and saw the Jingle Dress documentary, and some of you, I think, were we're at the 50 Kent event with Phil Montour, the 6 Miles Deep, which was a really great look at the sort of contentious history of the Haldeman Tract, which is what most of the Grand River is on. Most of the Grand River area is on. We are hoping to have a big one in Niagara coming soon, which will be a joint event with our refugee program and talking about newcomers and Indigenous people and the shared stories there. So we also do learning tours where you can travel to the north and learn from some traditional folks up there. We have a tour coming up this summer of an oncologist and a nursing staff that are coming up to learn a little bit about what healthcare looks like in the north, and also about some traditional medicines and stuff like that. So that's very exciting. And then I believe we have another group that the details are still unfolding, but there may be like a family trip coming up. So it's very exciting, yeah. To be able to go up to the north. Oftentimes you have moose stew, which is incredible, and you learn to skin a goose. So it's great. A lot of people from my generation don't realize that Mennonites ran 2 residential schools, and a lot of people in many congregations, we still have living teachers of the Mennonite schools, and it's sort of a delicate balance to walk. We had Poplar Hill, Strickland Lake, and Crystal Lake, and they were part of a system, I think, is the easiest way to talk about it. Is they were part of a system that was oppressive, and but I think it's part of our story, and we need to come to terms with that, but we also need to be supportive of people among us that may have taught at some of these schools, and work together to learn more about that history and figure that out together. But much of our work is with survivors of the Mennonite residential schools, and we've had this great relationship with the tribal council as MCC, and so there has been some reconciliation that has happened there, which is wonderful to see. My supervisor, Lindsay, likes to talk about a story when she started early on about, an elder in the community who came, pulled her aside and sat her down and said, "Where is your Mennonite Pope? Because I need to talk to him. We need to nail some things out." What he was looking for was, he was saying, the community needs some changes, and you've been here, you understand us, let's work together and make these changes, which has been a really wonderful experience to be able to work together and work on that relationship. And so we've come a long way in that area of the province. This is a group of survivors from the Mennonite residential schools that got together, sort of had a summit, and my boss is in there somewhere. I can't find her, but she's there somewhere. And each of the survivors is holding a quilt. Thank you so much. Each of the survivors is holding MCC quilt and has had a summit of healing and discussing further changes needed in the communities. Many of them brought their children and their grandchildren, and these are the people that represent why we do what we do. These are the relationships that we're working so hard to maintain and that are so important to us at MCC. I would like to leave you with another little poem by Lila June Johnson. She's an Indigenous person from the States. I can't remember where in the States she's from. But I feel like this is a really great way to sort of sum up how we can look at some of these relationships and yeah. So when you are ready to step into the court of stars with God as your advocate, we will be waiting. Near the dead stumps of the old Korean forest, we will be waiting for you. Together, we will plant seeds that nourish the future. The love we share will nourish us both, liberating colonized and colonizer from the chains of fear and hatred. So, thank you very much for having me. I welcome any questions after the service. Thank you.
Just want to say my own quick thank you to Kandace and just say that I feel this is an important thing for us to be aware of and consider because we are a settler people, and even though our Mennonite church, even in a lot of ways, whether actively or implicitly, have been involved in some of the hurt and pain that has happened to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. It's important to our family. Our family has spent some time with on a native reserve up, would have been on that map somewhere up about 3 hours north of Nipigon, and we still have friends and have seen some of that. God calls us to be people of good news, and in a lot of ways, the church, including our Mennonite church, in its history has been bad news to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. So it's something for us to be aware of, to be considerate of, and I think to be actively involved in restoring that relationship and to really becoming good news again to those folks. So it's important for us to think about that, and I appreciate your time in being here with us for that. Yeah, I think we're going to have another song now. Thanks.